Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today as co-host, Daniel McAdams. Daniel, nice to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Very good. We
Great.
have a very special program today and a
Yes.
special guest, somebody that has been following the markets for a long time and a lot of other things too, as well as foreign policy, and as Gerald Celente. Gerald, welcome to our program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Ron. And you're the, as I mentioned to people when they said, who did you vote for in the last election? I said, I didn't vote. I don't vote for a lesser of two evils. I said, the last person I voted for in a presidential election was Ron Paul. And that's it, boy. So thank you for everything that you do, the integrity, the honor, the dignity, the respect that you have for the nation and what you portray, and Mr. McAdams and all of you, what you do. It's a rare breed out there in today's very disturbed world. So thank you.
Yeah, and you know, I thought our reception was rather good when I was doing that, but I have to mention it as people like you who are talking to the people directly that makes a difference, introducing them into the ideas of good economic policy as well as foreign policy, and certainly you have done that, and you are a world-renowned forecaster. People watch what you say. You've been doing it since 1980, and you are the publisher and editor of the Trends Journal, so you do have a reputation. But Gerald, I'd like to start off today with the issue of the economy. And the one problem that I have with this program today is I don't think I can get to ask you all the questions I'd like to ask and let the discussion go. So we have sort of a limited amount of time. But anyway, I do want to start off with the economy. You have made projections in the past about the economy. But why don't we start off with that, what you anticipate. Are we in a very, very rosy economy right now with no worries like Wall Street would have us believe in some of the reports? Or do we have some basic flaws in our economy that we ought to be aware of?
Well, Wall Street isn't the economy. It's the very separate part of what this real economy is. And as you well know with the numbers, you have You have three people in the United States, Warren Buffett, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates, that have more money than 60% of us combined. And then when you look at the equity markets, 90% of the equity markets are owned by 10% of the population, with an average of about $350,000 in stock holdings. The rest, at 10%, owned by the so-called middle class, it's only averaging about 15,000. So when you look at the equity markets and look at the real economy, it's two very different worlds. Median household income is below 1999 levels. You know, people complain, and you keep hearing it, this is a failure of capitalism. This isn't capitalism. In capitalism, there's no such thing as too big to fail. That's called fascism, the merger of state and corporate powers. And that's what we have right now. So when you look at the tax cuts that Trump put in place, and when you look at what he said back in September, when he said this isn't going to help the wealthy, once again, he's backtracked on what he said. These tax breaks only help the very rich. So people keep asking me, is the stock market a bubble? Well, of course it is, but they keep inflating the bubble. And the bubble is going back again. What did they do? They're letting them repatriate the multinationals, all this overseas money. And now what are they going to do with it? Well, go back to when George Bush did that back in 2004. 96% of the money went into stock buybacks. And that's what you're seeing now. You didn't have to lower the tax rates for corporations from 35 to 21%, because look at the equity markets and look at the corporate income levels. They're very high. They're doing very well. So we didn't need to boost them because they're not putting that money into capital expenditures. They're not putting it into research, development, and growth. They're putting it into stock buybacks. That's why the markets keep going up. For the average person, again, look at the wage levels. What are you looking at? 2.5% increase a year? That doesn't even keep up with inflation, because everybody knows that these are fake inflation numbers. And you well know when Bill Clinton did that, so they wouldn't have to pay us more Social Security. So, no, for the average person, life is getting more difficult. Look at the debt level of credit cards. It's at an all-time high.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about interest rates, because we all know about QE and we all know about the Fed manipulating interest rates, and interest rates are too low, lower than the market, and that is a major contributing factor to the bubble. At the same time, it causes all the malinvestment and the debt. And of course, now the anticipation is with government debt building and all the debt where there's an obligation to pay interest rates are sort of trying to creep up. And I keep thinking, when's the Fed going to do this? And the argument can easily be made, well, the Fed's not going to do this. It's too hard. They're not going to raise the interest rate. But the question is, can there be another scenario? The Fed can, to a degree, control the interest rates for a long time. But what happens when people overseas, the Chinese and others, won't buy our dollar, or they reject the dollar? And isn't there a time where interest rates may become overwhelming, where just the Fed saying, well, we have to have low interest rates, where they actually lose it and they can't keep the interest rates low to make everybody happy on Wall Street?
Yes, it's going to happen at some point. But again, when you look at how much they've raised interest rates, even if they raise them another 3 or 4 times in this year, and now some people are saying 4 times, accounting for inflation, you're still at very, very low historic interest rates. And by the way, this is a war on the savers, because those of us that are old enough to remember, you had that thing called a savings account, and they had certificates of deposit, and people used to retire on their savings. Well, you can't get anything because they're only giving the money back to the bigs for mergers and acquisitions and stock buybacks. Going back to what's going on in China and the other ones also raising interest rates. I mean, China has their own problems. They have a debt to GDP ratio of 300. They're looking at the United States around, depending on whose numbers you look at, between 77 and 90. So there's only so much. And then when you look at foreign reserves and who's dealing with it, the yuan is only about 2%, 2.5% of all the foreign reserves. However, having said that, now that they're saying, no, we won't buy your oil, and they're the biggest consumers of oil, and pay you in petrodollars, we'll pay you in yuan, but you can take your yuan and cash it into gold, which they're doing with Russia, Venezuela, and even Saudi Arabia, who the United States made that deal with, the petrodollar deal back in 1971. They're demanding that they're going to pay you in yuan, not dollars. So yes, this is the beginning of the end, but there's a stretch in it. So we don't see it collapsing right now. At best, at worst, we should say, we see about a 10% market correction because it's gone up so quick.
Right. Daniel has a question for you.
Mr. Celente, let me just first welcome you and say what a great honor it is to have you on the show. I've been following your work for a long time, and I have to say, back on Capitol Hill when I worked for Dr. Paul, and I would check my little box and I would see a new Trends journal, it was a happy day for me. And it's one of the few publications I read from cover to cover. I pulled out excerpts and gave it to my colleagues. So terrific publication. So it's great to have you. Plus, I love watching your show. It's a mix of humor and outrage. Your show on YouTube, Trends in the News. So it's great to have you. I have a foreign policy question to shift gears a little bit. You probably noticed yesterday that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson announced at Stanford University's Hoover Institution, introduced by Condoleezza Rice of Iraq fame, that we're going to stay indefinitely in Syria. We're going to keep these bases that we occupy there. He said 3 conditions have to be fulfilled before we'll even consider leaving. First, ISIS fully and completely defeated. 2, Assad has to go. And 3, the Iranian influence in the region is curtailed, reduced or curtailed. Is this a return to the Obama foreign policy? Where is this coming from? Did this surprise you?
Well, first of all, you did a great piece on your website. Tillerson unveils new U.S. Syria plan, Assad must go. And you ended it by saying, President Trump has set is set to out the neocons with his foolish and destructive policy. The showman is shown to be nothing but a fraud. And that's basically what it is. And I think we should stop using this word neocons and start calling them warmonger freaks. Because this is mass murder that we're talking about. You know, you hear all these protests going on about sexual harassment. This is the front page of last Sunday's New York Times. I felt helpless. Male models accuse photographers of sexual exploitation. And then you open it up, and there's 2 full pages here of these male models and this sexual exploitation. Nothing here. Look at this. Look at this. This is the paper of record. As you know, I call it the toilet paper of record, because that's all this is good for. Nobody's talking about the mass murder. No one's talking about all the innocent people being slaughtered around the world, and we the people paying for it. So to answer your question about what's going on in Syria, this is merely a redo and a continuation of where Obama left off, with these lies that we have to protect other countries when our national security is not at stake. Obama, during sending us to war against Libya, he insisted that U.S. military force was justified, quote, when our safety is not directly threatened, but our interests and values are. Adding that ensuring regional security and maintaining the flow of commerce. No, not our interests and values. That's not what the Constitution says. It's when we are being attacked or threatened to be attacked. And I'm not a pacifist. I'm a close combat practitioner and have been for over a quarter of a century. I had my own school. If somebody tries to attack me, I'll attack the attacker. But I'm a man of peace, because I don't care what kind of fighter you think you are. Poof, lights go out like that. I don't care how good you are when something happens. And all of this support the troops that keeps going on. And I mentioned to you about the sexual harassment. Whatever happened to peace and love? Whatever happened to, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? And now it's support the troops in losing wars. They have not won a war since World War II. And now I'm hearing from Rex that they've got another strategy? What strategy? These are losers, and no one wants to call them that. So here you have a supposed businessman that's in office, and you have guys like Bezos that owns the Washington Post saying that he only would hire winners. The military hasn't won anything. How can people keep supporting losing strategies? And how all these people that are marching against sexual abuse, why don't they march against human abuse about the millions of people that America has killed over the last decades and the nations that they have destroyed? Oh, no. We got to talk about this. Oh, and by the way, these aren't women. Can't they fight for themselves?
Gerald, I want to excuse me. I want to go back and talk a little bit more about economics, but you know, talking about never admitting a losing strategy and they continue with the same policy. I think we can apply that to economic policy too, because of the changes made in the last 50, 60, 70 years. All this economic interventionism has given us these crises one after the other. But you in the earlier statement, you mentioned that so much wealth has gravitated to the very wealthy, and 3 people own as much as half the people in the country. And you also have said one of the trends that you've looked at is that the next next drop in the economy, the next time we have a setback, it's going to hit the wealthy more than the rest. How about addressing that? And has there been another time that you're anticipating? Has that existed before, or is it always started in a more conventional way of people losing their jobs and prices going up?
Yeah, we'll go back to the '29 crash. Remember they tell the story about the shoe shine boy, giving advice on how to buy stock. You go back to the dot-com bubble, the '87 bust, and you go back to the panic of '08 with subprime mortgages. Everybody was, not everybody, but the common person was involved in the markets. Now that I mentioned before, you have 10% that controls 90% of the market value. So when it falls, it's the top that's going to fall. But when the top falls, they still have a big cushion because they have so much. So it's not going to affect the economy in the sense that it won't hurt the average person. However, the psychological effect of a crashing market is very big. And that's the kind of pressure that it will push down. So again, though, as we're looking at it, we're in a period now that we have never seen before, when so few own so much. And by the way, we had the Gilded Age, and you could hate a Carnegie, but there was a thing called the public library system that he created. What are these billionaires doing with their money? I know, and I won't say who, the son of one of the richest people in the world. And when I launched Occupy Peace, which you almost came to over here, and closed down the most historic Four Corners in America, he was in here with me with Ralph Nader in my offices. They gave me the grand total of not 1 cent for peace. None of the billionaires are giving their money for peace, and the stupidity is, you hear it from everybody, well, war's profitable. No, peace is more profitable. So going on to where America's going, the top going down, and what you were saying about all the interference, look at China. It's an inside-out government. Like them or not, the Chinese government sets the economic policy, and they build it. And boy, are they building. When they got into the World Trade Organization in 2001, 5% of the Chinese population was middle class. Today, a country of 1.3 billion people, 35% are middle class. America, we have an outside-in situation, and I don't have to tell you. You got congressmen and senators that are paid off by corporations to push special interests, not the national interests. And that's why all the government interference in this country is only helping the few. And by the way, I wish they would stop using this term, campaign contributions. I'm not 6 years old. How about calling it bribes and payoffs?
That's for sure, Daniel.
Well, you are a renowned predictor of trends of how things will look. We've maintained on this show that our aggressive foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, has actually made us less influential than we think we are. If you were to look at the Middle East, if you were now to say, what will the Middle East look like with regards to U.S. policy at the end of this year, how would you say it would look? Our influence more, less? What is it going to look like?
Well, it's more, because the deal that's being made with Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Israel, and Iran is in the crosshairs. Again, when you read this garbage by Rex, Rex, hey, Rex, what are you writing over here about Assad and an undemocratic government, and everybody's falling all over the crown prince of Saudi Arabia? How many people did they behead yesterday? I mean, you want to talk about an undemocratic government, and they have the nerve to talk about Syria? Syria used to be a great vacation spot. It was one of the more affluent places in the Middle East until Obama and the other murderers started to destroy it. So no, it's going to escalate because of you have Israel telling us that Iran has no business being in Syria. You have Trump and the administration saying Iran is the worst supporter of terrorism in the world, when the United States, the Arab League have been the ones that have been doing it. And again, the facts are there. I'm not making this up.
Gerald, you've talked about a cashless society, that we're moving more toward using, the credit and cards and what all, and that we use cash much less. Do you foresee our government ever getting to the point where they're going to ban it? Other countries have tried this. Could it ever get that way? I know that people like the convenience of not using the cash, but once the government comes in, I know the government would like that. Their justification always is, we'll collect more revenues, that sort of thing. But do you think that they're likely to do that? So I'm sure in the 1930s, I wouldn't have thought that the government would make it illegal to own gold. I wonder if they'll make it illegal that you can't even carry paper money around.
Absolutely they will. Again, go back Election Day 2016. What they did over there in India when the prime minister called in 86% of the rupees under the guise that we are calling in all this money because there's a lot of fake money out there and a lot of black money, black market money, and we got to bring it into the banks. If you don't bring it into the banks, you're not going to be able to keep it. We're putting out a new currency. 99% of the money was returned, so it was a fraud. It wasn't about that at all. They're going cashless. They want to know every penny that you're spending. So now in India, people are using their apps. When you go to China, people aren't even using credit cards. Forget cash, they're using their app. So the government, as you said, they know every penny that you spent and every place that you spent it. Of course, it's more control over the people. Hey, just like how about them spying on us all the time? Do you need any more proof of how much more they want to look into our lives? And they need every penny that they could steal from us in the name of taxes. And again, as the big ones get the big breaks.
Gerald, we've talked a lot about Trump on this show, and you probably agree with us that when Trump was a candidate, we heard some things that made us feel a little optimistic despite our concerns about his style. He talked about getting along with Russia. He talked about no more regime change overseas. Some of these things resonated, and I think a lot of libertarians, a lot of liberty people probably supported him. We didn't, but supported him because of hearing this. Now they're saying, when he sort of seems to have flipped on a dime on so many of these places, North Korea, selling weapons to Ukraine, Middle East, etc., they want to say, oh, it's a deep state, he wants to do his best and he can. You get in there and he found out the deep state, oh, it's this, that, and the other. How would you explain this flip-flop from candidate Trump to now President Trump?
It's who he is. And again, this guy has a reputation of not being one of the most reputable business people. I know people that got shafted by him, with not paying the last payment. He's renowned for doing that. So that's all who he is. And again, it's not the deep state. I mean, look who's running the White House. You got 3 generals in there. Eisenhower would be turning in his grave after giving that speech about no foreign entanglements. Trump is just back in military school. I mean, he tells us that, no, he's giving the generals in the Pentagon the choice to do whatever they want. They're not supposed to be running the government. So again, you have McMaster's, you got Kelly, you got Mattis. In the White House, the government's being run by the Pentagon and by the military-industrial complex.
Gerald, I want to finish up on a question dealing with privacy. You mentioned that the government spies on us constantly, and there was a vote just recently on FISA courts. Unfortunately, we lost that. The Fourth Amendment has essentially gone. Ever since the 9/11, whether it's the Patriot Act or whatever, they spy on us constantly. And that's the government. But what is your understanding of the relationship of the social media, the Facebooks and Google, and their ability to collect a lot of information and their willingness to work with the government? At the same time, they're not under any threat of lawsuit. They're exempted. How do you see this connection between the social media? Because some of us at one time thought, we always hope, that would be a way we can get our information out. But do you see this as a problem?
It's a great problem. I mean, what right do they have to watch everything that we do? And again, how about Amazon? Working with the CIA, And you keep going on and on with these kind of things. So it's a huge problem, and there's starting to be a pushback on it. And by the way, people put up phony Gerald Celente websites. I had to take Google to court. It cost me $120,000 to hire a New York City lawyer. They took it down. And you know what? They put it back up, and Google refuses to take it down. Fraudulent.
Yeah.
And they won't do it. So they could look. You were in government. You know the deal. Money talks, and that's all that's going on now. Big money is in control. Again, this is not capitalism, as a paisano of mine would have said, who I'm not too fond of, Mussolini. It's the merger of state and corporate powers. Look how many times the Silicon Valley people were in the Obama White House. Look at how Google, and when it came out with the Russians, I'm joking, of course, pulling out the DNC information, showed how tight Google was with the Clinton administration. So it's the one club that's running the one big show.
So, well, Gerald, we are going to finish up, but I want to thank you very much, because I think our agreement and association comes down that we certainly want to promote peace, which is very important to you and what you've done, and also understanding economics for the purpose of prosperity. But over and above all that is the promotion of individual liberty, and I think that is the case. So I thank you very much, Gerald, for being with us today. It's been delightful to have you on.
Oh, thank you for having me on. It's a real honor. And thank you for all that you're doing.
Thank you. And I want to thank our audience today for joining us today for this very special interview with Gerald Celente. Come back soon.